Hello, today I want to explain what the f-stop is. It's one of the fundamental camera controls, and it has an extremely strange name, and I think that makes it difficult for people to kind of wrap their head around it. So what I want to use instead is a name that's used interchangeably, and that's the aperture. And just as the name implies, aperture, as if you're looking up in the dictionary, an aperture is simply a hole, and the aperture in the camera is the hole in which light passes through. So yes, it goes through the lens, but inside the lens there is a hole, and you can change the size of that hole, and that is the aperture. Let me show you what it looks like right now. Alright, I have this old film camera here. It's an old Canon film camera, and the reason I brought it out is because you can really see how these things operate, and it's a lot more difficult to do in a digital camera. So if I open up the back and I fire this sucker off, you're looking straight through the lens right now, and you can see there's a hole. Now you can see that I'm changing the size of that hole. That is the f-stop. That's it. For such a weird, funky name, it's kind of a simple little thing. So that's why you can also call it the aperture. Now there must be a reason why you can change the size of this, because otherwise they just build cameras with just either the most wide open aperture f-stop available to let in the most amount of light. So let me explain to you something called depth of field, and that is what is controlled using the f-stop. Okay, my face is really close to the camera right now because I want to demonstrate something called depth of field. The depth of field is how much of the frame is in focus from front to back. So the closer I get to the camera, my hands go out of focus. And then at a certain point, if I back up, then I go out of focus as well. So there's a certain range of focus from front to back, and that is called the depth of field. That is controlled by the f-stop or the aperture. By changing the f-stop, by changing the aperture, you're able to increase or decrease this the depth of field. So the easy way to remember it when you're looking at f numbers, aperture numbers, is the smaller the number, the smaller your depth of field. The larger the number, the larger your depth of field. If you'll notice, the house behind me is out of focus as well. Alright, the aperture range is actually pretty well displayed on this camera lens here. The older style lenses had something called the f-stop ring, which is this right here, that moves. And that is what I was changing to change the aperture in the camera earlier. So here you can see it goes from 1.8 all the way to 22. And it seems like a funky scale because it goes 1.8, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22. Basically, the way to think of that, actually 1.8 is the largest aperture, meaning it's the largest diameter hole. F22 is the smallest diameter hole. So think of it as like the bottom half of a fraction. You can also think of it as a gauge system, you know, a gauge of wire, pipe gauge. The smaller the number, the larger the aperture. The larger the number, the smaller the aperture. Now that's a little confusing. So what I would try to remember is that when you're thinking about depth of field, just remember the larger the number, the larger the depth of field. The smaller the number, the smaller the depth of field. Now another property of the depth of field is the closer you get to the camera, like I am now, I'm fairly close, the depth of field becomes much narrower. So you can see the camera goes in and out of focus fairly. It's only maybe 8 inches or so, and the house in the background is completely out of focus. The closer you are, the narrower the depth of field. The further away I get, so if I focus on the house now, the depth of field actually becomes much larger, and when I go to stand in front of it, I won't have to stand 8 inches away. at least a good 3 feet from the house, and I'm still in focus. And then you'll see as I get closer, I'll eventually go out of focus again. Let me be clear, not all lenses have the same aperture range. This one goes from 2.8 to 32. Now it does have the same numbers in between, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, and then up to 32. And that's just because different lenses, are going to be made differently. They're going to, it's more of a premium to have a larger aperture diameter, which means a very small number. So this lens you can see is fairly large diameter. It's a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Now, some lenses may go down to 1.4, and some may go as high up as, well, in the SLR range. I'm not sure if too many above 32, but I know the large format cameras go up to 64. So why would you change the depth of field? There's two main reasons why people change the depth of field, or I should say two common reasons. One is they're shooting landscape. Sorry about the crows, but I'm running out of light and time. In landscape photography, you typically have a foreground, middle ground, and a background. You want all of those in focus because you're trying to convey a sense of depth. So like a tree in the foreground, a pond in the middle ground or a lake, and then a mountain in the background. So then you choose like f22, f32, and if you have the option in the large format camera, f64 and all that. Now in portraiture, you kind of do the opposite oftentimes, because you're taking pictures of a subject. You don't want the background to compete for the audience's attention, but you want to place them sort of in something that's somewhat interesting in the background. So in this case, I have a farmhouse with a window in the upper left-hand corner. I want the window to be slightly out of focus so that your attention is more drawn to me and not the window. So there's no competition there within the scene. So I specifically chose a smaller aperture number. In this case, I think it's f5.6. In order to keep the depth of field kind of small. Now, I will show a few examples of where the f-stop, or choosing your depth of field, will help with making and composing a nice photo.